everybody. Very happy to be live with Robert Lloyd, who's going to start us off with an intro to himself and his books for us.
Am I?
Yes, please.
Okay, you've launched that on me. You want me to tell people about the Poison Machine?
Yes, please do.
So it's the sequel to the Bloodless Boy, which came out this time last year, and it continues the story of Harry Hunt and Robert Hooke, the two main characters of my books, who were real people. Robert Hooke was the curator of experiments at the Royal Society. It's set in 1679, this one, a year later. And Harry, this time, kind of separates from Robert Hooke, goes his own way a little bit, and ends up investigating the murder of a dwarf out in the Cambridgeshire Fens. The twist there, it's quite early on in the book, so I don't mind giving it away. The twist there is that nobody knew that this particular dwarf was dead. It was Captain Geoffrey Hudson, who was the Queen's dwarf. He was extraordinarily small, 18 inches tall or so. And they find his skeleton inside a ship's jolly boat. So obviously there's been an imposter. Another dwarf has taken Geoffrey Hudson's place, and Harry must track him down. He's escaped. He's run away at the news that the real Geoffrey Hudson has been found. Taking with him some secrets, I guess, which I don't want to give too much away. But Harry's job ends up being to track the imposter down, and that leads him to Paris, and then he must return to London to try and stop a conspiracy, an assassination attempt on Charles II's wife, the Queen. So that's the broad outline of book 2, The Poison Machine.
Is the Queen's dwarf a real person?
The Queen's dwarf was a real person. Yes, he was famously presented to the Queen at a banquet inside a pie. Presumably it was a cold pie, so he jumped out from beneath the pastry, presented himself, much to the Queen's delight. But as I say, he was only 18 inches tall, and perfectly proportioned, supposedly. And they made him a suit of armor. He joined the Queen's retinue, along with a giant called William Evans. They developed a routine, apparently, where Evans would put him between two slices of bread and put him in his pocket and produce him as a whatever they called a sandwich before the Earl of Sandwich. Yes, he became very popular, and so much so he was taken off to the Dutch courts and the French courts and shown off as this kind of wonderful rarity of nature. He was a real person.
How tall would a giant be in those times?
Oh, you've caught me out there. 7 feet something. There's a picture of them both next to one another, and the difference is it is quite extraordinary. Yeah. So the whole idea of the Poison Machine came from reading Nick Page's book Lord Minimus, all about Geoffrey Hudson. And the very weird thing that I picked up on was that he was captured by Barbary pirates and ended up suffering 25 years of servitude under the pirates. And when he returned to England, he had doubled in height, which pleased him very much, apparently. But to me, I thought questions must be asked here. So a neat and I thought slightly amusing interpretation of that was that actually these were two different men. One dwarf taller than the other, who behaved as took Hudson's place. His cottage, funnily enough, is still visitable.
Oh, cool. We've got some hellos from Samantha. Donna Morford has said thanks, Sam. Hi both. Leslie said hello. She's also
Hi there,
telling me
folks.
she can tell I've got my voice back, which is
yes, alarming reports that Caroline had lost the voice. That was worrying.
I was down to a whisper on Wednesday.
Yeah, I was looking up semaphore just in case it was going to be reduced to that.
Yeah, I was going to write notes. Just hold up questions.
Yeah, wave up placards.
We've talked about like your interest in it before. I like that we met Newton in this book as well. We met
Isaac Newton. Yeah.
Because him and Hook did not get on overly.
No, they famously disagreed. They had a correspondence. They fell out originally because Isaac Newton sent his reflecting telescope to the Royal Society for their inspection, and Hook's job as curator, as well as coming up with his own experiments to show to the Fellows of the Royal Society. Part of his job was to analyze, rate other people's inventions, and he was scathing about Newton's telescope, and was quite rude about it, and Newton took great offence at that. They later fell out over the inverse square law. So Hooke felt that he had suggested that to Newton. They also disagreed on the nature of light. Hooke had put forward the theory that light is a wave, whereas Newton felt that it was corpuscular. So they had these disagreements. And one of the perhaps a myth, but one of the stories about Newton is that he refused to come to London and be the president of the Royal Society until Hooke had gone, and supposedly destroyed a portrait of Hooke that used to hang at Gresham College. That story is possibly apocryphal, but it's a nice idea that there was a portrait of Hooke. A couple of kind of possibles have come along, but as far as we know, there's no likeness of Hooke anywhere that can positively be identified as being him. It's a nice idea that Newton threw this into the fire, but it's probably not true. He certainly worked to squash Hooke's reputation after he died in 1703. Hooke is often seen as being kind of ill-natured and disputatious, and perhaps he was later in life. But I think Newton probably was just as much. He was easy to take offence, and he plays a small part in the book, doesn't he? But I hope that kind of character comes through. I suspect nowadays we would say that Newton was on some kind of spectrum, but he was very private and difficult to get on with.
Yeah, I like that he appeared in the book. What I wonder is how hard it is if you're writing in real people. Like how does that affect kind of your story? Because you've got to stick to certain facts, haven't you, when you're using real people?
You do. So in some ways that's easier because we know a lot about these people. Um, I do take certain liberties with them, as any historical fiction writer does when they incorporate real people. As soon as you start putting dialogue into people's mouths, you've moved away from history and into fiction. Um, I've written and spoken elsewhere about the kind of ethics of doing this. Um, it's easier in some ways because you want your portrait of that person to be plausible. There are all sorts of gaps in the historical record that you can exploit. So you know you might just have letters that um, still exist, but there might be months between those letters. You can make up all sorts of things that these people were doing in your fiction. Um, but yes, if you're going to put Newton into a book, he has to match the known record of him. He can't be muscle bound and jolly or 7 feet tall. You have certain facts that you have to stick with. I think the books are quite well researched, but I do play around with stuff, and hopefully people who are very into the history of the 17th century will enjoy what I've done rather than take great umbrage.
Sam has said it's an interesting way of thinking about it, the dialogue allowing the fictional side alongside the facts.
Yeah, I mean, historians do this as well, don't they? In any history book, a historian has to simplify and compress. History is one damn thing after another, isn't it? And it's complex, and there are far too many characters in it. A thriller, a historical thriller, or any other kind of thriller, seeks to keep the story propelling along, charging along. You have to simplify, but any historian has to do the same thing. They are bringing presumably records, and they're finding nuggets that they think are worthy of putting into the history book that they're writing. In the same way, my fiction, I look for things that I can put into um, hopefully an exciting and but still plausible story. And I'll leave the enthusiastic reader to kind of try and disentangle what I've made up and what's facts.
I think they're quite educational. I'm sure I've learned things about the history as I've read the
A
books.
lot of, a lot of people say they read it, and constantly are looking at Google, which hopefully doesn't slow them down. They seem to enjoy that. The Kindle version is very interactive. It explains all sorts of things um, as you go through the book. Personally, I'd like someone to kind of charge through it and read it at the pace that I've written it. But I'm not going to dictate how people read books.
Yeah, I think when I read it, I sort of know the interaction because I'm a scientist. I sort of know more about the scientific people in there and some of the things that were there at the time, but I don't know the general history, and that's the bits that I'm kind of picking up as I go.
Yeah,
Um, do you? There's some quite feisty women in it, isn't there? In like both books, we get some quite strong ladies.
I hope so. I hope they're interesting. The Hortense Mancini again was a real person that we know a lot about. She wrote her own memoirs, unusually for a woman or a lady as she was, a duchess at that time. She had an extraordinary life and was an extraordinary person, and she broke all sorts of societal norms. So she's a fascinating character. Grace Hook is the other main character here. Again, we know certain things about her. Physical description we have from John Aubrey, and Hook's diary mentions her from time to time. I didn't want. It's tricky, isn't it? I'm a 56-year-old man writing female characters, and you know there are sort of responsibilities and difficulties. I don't want them to be cartoonishly, active and swashbuckling. And Harry isn't. He's not a kind of macho main character. The female characters kind of developed as I wrote them. I didn't want either of them to be damsels in distress, ready to be rescued by Harry. I wanted something a little bit more complicated and interesting than that. The early reviews have said that people like Grace and Hortense, and I'm very pleased about that. You know, strong-willed characters of either sex, gender, are more interesting to write. I don't need somebody simpering in the background generally.
Yeah, in fact, sometimes it's the secondary characters that kind of rescue Harry, isn't it?
Yeah, and I like the fact that half the time he's oblivious to what the people closest to him are up to or thinking. He's supposed to be an observator. He's supposed to be an investigator. But he does miss things, and I hope I've done that in a way that kind of elucidates his character rather than undermines it. But yeah, in the first book, in particular, he had no idea what the women were up to. It's such a male pursuit. The science of that time, that the fellows were all male. That there's great consternation when a female visits Gresham College, and it blinds him in all sorts of ways. So he's a flawed investigator. He's not Jack Reacher, is he? It's not what I set out to write.
He's not, but I think that adds to the charm of the book. The fact that he's probably more like a real investigator, because he is oblivious. He does miss clues, and he does like go the wrong way down things. And I'm sure people do that when they investigate things. They're
Yeah,
not always
yeah,
find the answer first time, are they? And I think that's quite good. And
that's right. I
sometimes
mean,
to help him out. And
one of the models for that, I love the Ian Rankin Rebus books, and Rebus misses things. Morse misses things. They'll quite often drag in a suspect for questioning. That there can be plenty of different series. Scandi Noir is full of this. And it becomes such a trope that you kind of know that if someone's identified too early in the plot, you know that they can't be the actual villain. But Harry makes mistakes. He's a self-portrait in lots of ways, and that's one of the ways. He prides himself on looking for evidence. But the evidence often leads him astray, or he misinterprets the evidence that is given. But as all dogged investigators do, he gets there in the end.
so when you were researching the book, she said that like the dwarf's cottage is still somewhere you can visit. Did you go and visit there? Is it easier if
Yes,
you can go and see?
I used to live in the Cambridgeshire Fens, so the Denver sluice where the body is found. All that part of the country is familiar to me. So Oakham in Rutlandshire is where Geoffrey Hudson's cottage is. Strangely enough, it's also the birthplace and where he grew up. Titus Oates came from the same place, who's a kind of background character. He hangs over the first two books because he was the person largely responsible for pushing the Popish plot, which continues through book one, book two, and into book three. I chose a lot of the buildings. I chose deliberately in this book because they still exist, as well as sort of various buildings of Hooks that still survive. The Bibliothèque Mazarine in Paris, you can still go to. You can still go to the Duchess de Bouillon's house. So you know, I have a fantasy that when the books really take off, you know, there will be tours given. You can go around and see a lot of these places.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great to go and see some of the places. There's some scenes in the Bastille that we won't talk about in detail because they would give spoilers away. But I was reading them thinking, how hard must this have been to write? Because you cannot visit the Bastille.
No, but you know, there are plans of it. There are plenty of historical documents from people who were there, who suffered the regime. You've got a lot of the staff names of the Governor General. You know, you know a lot of the people there. Fascinatingly, book three, I move a lot of the action is in the Bethlehem Hospital on Moorfields, which Robert Hooke designed and oversaw the building of. And I have all of the staff names and even some of the disciplinary records of the people who worked there at the time that book three is set. So you know, you can find out a lot, and then you know, take the details that survive and spin them into something. Hopefully I continue to do that for book four.
Mentioned fleetingly in book two, isn't it? I think Hunt takes his way through or near the grounds of the Bethlehem Hospital, and he talks about
and in fact, on page one of book one of the Bloodless Boy, he sees it. So it's a kind of metaphor for the madness that Hook and Harry find themselves in. It's always there. You know, I mention it from time to time, but book three, I felt it needed to play a larger role. Hook designed it, of course, for the you know, the beneficial treatment of patients, and patient care was taken very, very seriously by the then physician, Dr. Thomas Allen, who designed it with Hook. It was only later, I think, in Hogarth's time, that it had become the Bedlam that we think of now.
Yeah, I was thinking that when I read it, that it's interesting how it's changed. Like, it'd be interesting to sort of see the change of it over the time.
Yeah.
From how Hook intended it to sort of what we think of about it now, because we wouldn't think of it the way that Hook designed it.
Yeah. It fell apart in the end because it was built over the infill ditch for next to the old Roman wall. When they built the wall, they left a ditch, so they filled all that in. So the foundations were never very secure. But its replacement building, the central pavilion of that, still exists and is the main entrance to the Imperial War Museum. So you can go to the Imperial War Museum, and that is the next Bethlehem Hospital building that you're looking at, which I always am a bit astounded by when I go to the Imperial War Museum.
You've got, and I don't know if this is in the hardbacks as well, because I got a review copy, but they've got a beautiful illustration at the beginning of every chapter. Who does those?
Yeah,
it's just such a lovely kind of moment in the book every time you get to a new chapter.
Well, the design of the book, it's I think beautifully designed thing. The chapter beginnings, let's find one at random. It's very nicely put together by Melville House. Deckled edges as well, but if you can see that you've got that rough edge to it to make it look like a kind of a collection of documents a little bit more. That was particularly apt for The Bloodless Boy, I think. Slightly divisive. Some people aren't too sure about their deckled edges. A couple of people have thought it's a mistake, but as an object, I am very, very pleased with what Melville House have done to my story. They've produced this marvelous book, which is rather wonderful. Shiny text as well. I like that bit too.
It's a thing of beauty. As you're reading it, you sort of enjoy the illustrations and everything else. And I think
and just the quality of paper that they've used.
Yeah, it's such a lovely experience. Sam has asked if there's any other real people whose lives you'd like to explore in a book.
In future books, well, the third book, as the first book posited a fictional solution for the historical mystery of who killed Sir Edmund Berry Godfrey, the Justice of Peace. And the third book is all about Thomas Thynne. So he was the richest man in the country. He supported the Duke of Monmouth in the exclusion crisis. He used his money to promote Monmouth. And famously, he was murdered by Count Königsmark, a Swedish count, and his accomplices, who Königsmark was having an affair with his wife, Elizabeth Percy. The Percy family were the richest of landowners. She was only 15 when she was married to Thomas Thynne. Amazingly, he was her second husband. So the Duke of Monmouth was married when he was 13. These are different times, aren't they? So yes, Thomas Thynne, but various other. There's a kind of squad of fellows that I go back to. Christopher Wren plays a larger part in book 3, not for his architecture so much, but for his knowledge of brains. He was an anatomist as well as an architect, and worked with Thomas Willis on the structure of the brain, and illustrated Willis's book. So these are all fascinating people with many strings to their bow. So the idea of characters coming in and out of the books, reappearing, having smaller parts, larger parts. John Aubrey is one of the background characters who I would love to bring to the fore, perhaps in book 4. Always penurious. He was an antiquarian. He surveyed Avebury, which I think is one of the most amazing places. He famously said that Avebury to Stonehenge is like a cathedral to a church. I think Avebury is a spectacular place to go to if you've never been there. So yes, there are lots of fellows. The first Winston Churchill was an early fellow of the Royal Society at this time. I have an idea that he would be a nice name to conjure with.
Do you have other sort of experiments, or do you have like any other experiments or sort of things from the Royal Society that you'd like to bring in? Because your science in them it's lovely. Kind of, you've talked about the stimulation of nerves in the most recent one, haven't you? That they did.
Yeah,
but I'm just
picked up on book 3. So book 3, the science that I concentrate is anatomy. But the other thing about Harry Hunt, one of the few facts that we have about Harry, is that he was also an artist. He was an illustrator. So his left various pictures behind. A two-headed puppy is one of the pictures that is left. Another giant, he did an image of an 8 feet tall Swiss hussar. I know how tall he was. And he also illustrated a history of fish. So we have lots of his fish illustrations. So in the third book, I explore his artistic side as well. So it's not just the science. Robert Hooke, of course, famously was apprenticed to Peter Lely, Sir Peter Lely, the portrait painter. And in book 3, Peter Lely becomes a character. So yes, these people constantly pop up. The one I've deliberately consciously avoided so far is Samuel Pepys, because everyone writes about Samuel Pepys. I'm kind of consciously avoiding Pepys.
Is he gonna appear in any other book, or will you continue to avoid him?
Hooke invented a signalling system for the Navy, which he showed to Samuel Pepys. Samuel Pepys became the president of the Royal Society, not I think 1682, I think. So I'm sure he will he will appear at some point.
So in this book we've travelled to France. Do you have plans to take Harry out of the country again?
I've thought about it. Book 3, I've gone the other way. It's very claustrophobic. It's all in a very small part of London. I won't say where. So he travels far less in book 3. Book 4 is very sketchy at the moment, so that might be more expansive again. Amsterdam at this time is very interesting as a centre of science. There are various other people I'd like Harry to meet in Europe, but these are sketchy ideas at the moment.
And it's kind of interesting to think about how they would travel, because it's not as easy, obviously.
Well, indeed, yeah. I think 30 miles a day by carriage would be a kind of good distance to be able to travel. The world was much smaller. We'll shoot up a motorway and not think anything of it. It would be, it might be a 5-day journey from north to south in those days. So with all the stops on the way, and you probably never knew quite what kind of inn you were going into. All sorts of safety issues, I would imagine.
But also be interesting to show them what like our science and things is like now, wouldn't it? Can you imagine bringing Hook or Hunt to the modern times and showing them like just the sheer international global scale of science, that you can share your results in minutes? And
Yeah, and you're talking about the nature of light. To tell Newton and Hooke that actually it's both corpuscular or and a wave. Wouldn't that be marvelous? To show them Einstein's theories of relativity, general and special. It would be bonkers. Hooke was a horologist. Wouldn't it be great to show him a digital watch?
exactly, there's all these things. It'd be amazing. And Grace now would just love life, wouldn't she? Having a bit more freedom and
Yeah, again, I mean, book 3 really looks closely at how constrained women were, and the kind of the main overarching theme is servitude and a lack of freedom. I really explore that. So for example, the Africans in London, as well as well as the role of women, how circumscribed people's lives were by their social station, how little kind of social mobility there was, what the aristocracy got away with. Yeah.
Compared to what, like I mean, it's surprising, isn't it? And I think it's reflected quite well in the stories. You know, you do reflect on people of all different kind of
Mm,
economic levels in them, don't you? You know, with your characters and things.
yeah. The unfairness of it. It's why I love the slightly later novels of Daniel Defoe or Henry Fielding. You know, um, I'm sort of thinking people like Nell Gwynn can kind of go from being an orange seller to being an actress to becoming a darling of the court, but that's purely because of you know, physical appearance or wit. There was some, but you know, most people would find life very difficult.
So you've been commissioned for book 3 and 4, which is very good news.
It means I've
Do
got a
you,
deadline, though, Caroline. I've got a deadline. I've not had a deadline before. Not really. The deadlines for rewriting, but not for writing a whole book. That's a bit daunting.
but I get book 3 and 4 to read, which is excellent. Do you plan to finish the series with book 4, or do you have plans to go further? I mean, obviously they have a
I've
finite.
not really thought that far ahead. You kind of idly think about other periods of time to go to, but well, one reason I enjoy writing when I'm writing is that it's relatively untrodden territory. Not that many historical fiction authors are looking at the late 1670s into the 1680s. Andrew Taylor's Ashes of London series is catching up with me. I have to sort of fight to stay ahead of him. I'll have to keep producing a book a year just to try and keep in front of Andrew Taylor. Robert Harris has just brought out Act of Oblivion, which is 1660. So it's nice to have people, you know, as big as Robert Harris come into the second half of the 17th century. There are quite a few Civil War based novels, but not many in my particular patch. So it's I get a little bit proprietorial about it. I'm moving into the 1680s now. So you know, if I were to look at the Victorians or the Tudors or World War II, there are far more authors who've staked their claim in that in those particular time periods.
Do you think that writing them when you do though makes them a harder sell to people?
So it makes them what? Sorry,
Like a bit of a harder sell?
I I've got a publisher who went for it. Um, when the first book was written, before it was self-published, it went before 4 different publishers, and I think the reason that it was turned down was that you know, no one else was writing about that particular time. Hopefully, with Andrew Taylor's books in particular, people, it's such a ridiculously fascinating time. It will be good to think that it's not a hard sell so much. now. That there's stuff around. If you think of Hook, he lived through the civil wars, Cromwell's rule, the plague, the Great Fire, the Exclusion Crisis, the Popish Plot. These are all massive events in British history. It's really rich, fertile ground to be writing in, and hopefully my books encourage people. That slice of time is an attractive place to spend their reading time in.
No, it absolutely is. They're fascinating books. They're really, really, really good.
Thank you.
And more people should read them. I'm just wondering, like, it's not a time that people would overly think about reading. Like there is a lot of Victorian and Second World War books, and people sort of recognize it as a genre. And I think when you sort of start something in a relatively untrodden ground, it's a little bit harder to sort of persuade people across. I mean, they
Possibly.
absolutely should go across.
And I was bowled over by the fact that the Sunday Times have made it one of their historical fiction books. I think they call it of 2022, and it's their the list gets ever longer as the months go by. But Waterstones, you won't be able to find a copy outside London. So Waterstones see it as a risk, and maybe that's because it's set when it's set, or maybe it just hasn't sold enough to encourage them, to send it out to the provinces.
Although perhaps you could order it in the provinces, but that's
there are lots of independent booksellers out there who it's a tricky thing, isn't it? Because you want to be doing something new. I did try to write a World War II book. I researched it. I was going to tailor that for GCSE students. So, everything that's on the curriculum for GCSE, I wanted to write a short book. Maybe the wrong time to do it, but I got really bogged down in the research, and I got quite depressed. It was disturbing. I didn't enjoy the reading that I was doing, because just so many atrocious, awful things happen, and I stopped. I gave up. I don't know why I find my little slice of history. It gives me happiness and security. I like being there.
I know. I mean, it's good, and I think I'm all for fiction that takes you to new and interesting places. So I keep going with them. I will read as many of them as you write.
Thank you.
Definitely got sales with me, and I'm sure there will be with other people, because I can't imagine that you've met Hook and Hun and all of the other characters in these two books, and you wouldn't go and buy book 3.
Thank you. Well, that's a nice thing to say. I mean, each book hopefully ends with the idea. One of the main sort of motors of it is that Harry changes through each book, and then the next book takes that change further on. Something happens at the end of book 2, which you won't give away, Caroline.
No, we're not going to discuss. No,
that is going to change Harry massively, and so he faces the consequences of that in book 3, and the end of each book hopefully will make people wonder what's going to happen next. If with Harry, as well as with everything else, you've got the Harry Grace thing going on as well, which like moonlighting. Will they? Won't they? Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd. I'm showing my age there. So
would we find out an answer to that? Could we Google and find out an answer to that?
Absolutely.
Is there an answer to that in real life?
Um,
And will fiction match it? Because even if there is an answer, doesn't mean that you would go the same way.
yeah, there is a very definite answer to that, but I'll leave people to look that up. But Grace, it's something I'm having to skirt around, and if you know it, then you'll know why I am. I'll say no more.
Okay. Yeah, we're not going to go into any spoiler territory because there were questions I wanted to ask you and I won't on
Yeah,
the screen. There are some
it
things
is.
where you
Yeah,
would have to
yeah.
give stuff away. Sam has asked you how long each book takes to write and how long you have for each future book because of the deadlines.
Okay, you'll be shocked to hear that I started The Bloodless Boy in the year 2000. I wrote it around my job. I was a secondary school teacher. So that took me 12, 13 years before it was in a state that I felt I could send it to literary agents. Part of the reason for that was I kept putting it away. I kept getting fed up with it, so it might live on my Apple Mac for 6 months before going back to it. I never had a clue how to finish it. I kept researching, I kept reading, I kept sort of kicking myself up the backside. I really must, I've done this much work, I've got to get the thing finished. I'd read something and think, oh, that's interesting, that's got to go in. And it became a real kind of plum pudding, and it became a bit of a monster. So editing took ages. One day out on a walk, I suddenly realized who did it. Um, and that was enormous. So I was then able to re-edit the book with the focus being on who actually committed the crime. So book two, I was far more disciplined, and I would say that probably took me again working part-time around my teaching job. Um, I would say that took 2 to 3 years. I started with the end. I knew exactly how it was going to finish. I was far more disciplined. I planned the thing. I did a long plan, perhaps 10, 15,000 words, something like that, before I started getting precious about sentences. And that, you know, for me, that seems to suit me better. That level of detail in the plan. The other alternative way of writing is to start with a blank page and see where your characters take you. I find I can do a lot of that in a long and detailed plan. Book three, all planned out again, a long plan. I've been writing it on and off over the last couple of years. I've now got a deadline of April the 25th, so I have to get the thing finished. So otherwise, I'm not sure what happens. I think Melville House come and take my house away. I'm not sure what the penalties are, but it has to be finished by a deadline now. So it's a different way of working.
You're not going to take the Douglas Adams approach then of enjoying the deadlines.
No, to hear it whistling by, yeah. You would think if you set a target of 1,000 words a day, and some people do more than that, you would think that would be easy, wouldn't you? You'd think if you call yourself a writer, if you call yourself an author, 1,000 words a day should be very doable. 5,000 words a week, 20,000 words a month, 4 months. You've got a novel. But actually, for my way of working, especially with the kind of level of research and that is quite a tool. I find it difficult. I'm pretty disciplined. I'll be on my chair at 9:30 in the morning after the kids are at school and be writing. But it's quite demanding. It's not coal mining, but it's quite demanding.
I think it must be more demanding with the level of research needed for your book as well. Because we think about you're sort of saying writing in it's 1,000 words a day, but that's for any kind of book. If you've got to then go and drill deeply into the research as well, and you've got to know your historical time, and you can't mess around with it because you've got real people in there who are doing real things.
It's one of the reasons that a plan works for me, because I can write out a plan. I already know a fair amount because I've kind of lived with Hook since the mid 90s when I did my MA on him. So I kind of know stuff. But if I write a plan, that plan also includes must find out this, must find out that. So each chapter will have notes to myself. Where was this person then? If I sort of blithely put in a character without knowing too much about them, I know that by the time I'm writing that chapter, one of the characters in book 3, it's a fictional character, but she's Polish and she's Jewish, and I will have notes. I must know this, and it's a bit of a kind of it's challenging. It's daunting. I've got to, but I know I'm focused on finding that out. I'm not just swimming in a sea of research, picking out plums from stuff that I find interesting. I'm using indexes in books to find stuff out. I'm so that kind of scaffolding that I've got makes things more efficient and quicker.
Sam's asked if you've got any resources that you found useful other than research, any writing books you recommend?
Where am I? Not sure where I'm pointing here. That way. So these are my writing books.
You've got quite a collection.
Leave the cats on there. The best one I've lent out. It's David Babberline's book on story. So I bought all these books and I've read all those books. The most absurd one. Where's that? The most ridiculous one is this one. Don't buy that. That boils down every story to 120 points. It's mainly on film, but it's so kind of prescriptive. So yeah, lots of resources on how to write. I always find it fascinating how other writers write, and just to name drop, I had a chat with Lee Child online, and he famously starts on 1st of September every year with a blank page and doesn't know what the book's going to be about. He just starts writing and he finds out what Jack Reach is up to, where he's going to go, and who's going to be in trouble and how Jack's going to save them. He doesn't know any of that when he first starts writing. You've got the Stephen King book. Listening online to, I was listening to Dean Koontz talking about how he writes the other day, and that's interesting because he polishes a chapter over and over before he goes on to the next chapter, which I find that kind of interesting. Janice Hallett, I was listening to. She has a very particular way of writing, where again she follows the characters, so she'll find out what the characters are up to during the course of writing the novel, and then, as she puts it, reverse engineers. We'll go back through the book and do the editing that then needs doing. So, being aware of how other people work, being aware of how plots work, how the various tropes of either historical fiction or thrillers, how characters should change. Equally as interested in screenwriting and scripts, how films are structured. I like playing with the kind of tropes that we all know. I mean, this is the UK Crime Book Club. People who read thriller after thriller or murder mystery after murder mystery. We all know the structures. So I think that's a nice thing to sometimes play with, and you can subvert those structures. So you kind of, I have an interest in story. I may have gone off the point of the question a little bit, but resources, yes, I'm interested in plots. I'm interested in my historical research. I'm interested in the slice of history that I write about. Things like pictures, art. I've got a shelf. It's behind my easel, actually, but that's all. If I'm going the right way, so my bookshelves on. Where are you? Art and artists. I find that important and inspirational, and art theory, aesthetics. I'm interested in all of these things, and the 17th century, the philosophy of these people, the aesthetics of the time, the politics of the time. It's all grist to the mill, isn't it? And it's all something I've never lost interest in. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
It does. We've got 4 minutes left, so you need to give us a reminder.
Really? That's gone quickly.
I know. You need to give us a reminder about the Poison Machine. Maybe tell us if you've got any real life author events coming up. You going to any festivals? Doing any talks?
I do have a well, there's a very exciting interview coming up with NBC, which is because my publisher's American, so I do quite a lot of stuff for the States. I just had a great online chat with Andrew Grant, or Andrew Child, who's now co-writing the Lee Child and Jack Reacher books. There's a thing I'm doing for Writers Digest, which is all about using real characters in fiction. That's going to be an online. I think worryingly they call it a masterclass, which is funny. I've written 2 books, but they've asked me to do it, and it's paid work, so I'm very happy to do that. What else is coming up? There's various things. Very excitingly, I'm going to London this week and meeting the owner of Melville House, Dennis Johnson, who is the man who picked my book out from having been suggested on Christopher Fowler's blog. He got to hear about that, read the book and liked it. So it's his money that has gone into producing these beautiful books that we were looking at. So that's going to be cool, and book signing in lots of bookshops in London. So that's what this week has got in store. They've even paid for my train ticket, so that this is the life of an author. This is great.
Excellent. And then remind us about the Poison Machine again.
Okay, so there it is in all its beauty. Harry Hunt is called away from the Royal Society, employed by the Board of Ordnance, who we meet Sir Jonas Moore in the first book. Sir Jonas Moore persuades Harry Hunt to investigate the murder of a dwarf, who is a man that no one knew was dead. An imposter has lived in his place for the previous 25 years or so. The imposter has run away, taking various secrets with him, and the search for him takes Harry, his old friend Colonel Michael Fields, and Grace Hook across Cambridgeshire, and then Harry goes to Paris to track him down. There is an assassination plot against the Queen and her Catholic consort. So Harry has to make it back to London in time to save her.
And then all that's left for me to say is thanks for joining us again. It's been fascinating.
Thank you, as ever, Caroline. Thank you. You invited me last year. You've invited me again this year with my second book, and I'm very grateful to you.
No, you're very welcome.